Carol Topp, Homeschool CPA, Homeschool Co-ops, Tips and Traps for Leaders. We've got a handout to follow along so we can concentrate on what we want to have a discussion here. Let's talk about the pros and the cons of co-ops, right? So I did another workshop at another convention called Homeschool Co-ops Are Like Marriage. Know what you're getting into. Pros and cons. Your co-op is a huge influence, especially on the next generation, and they need it. So, and I'm not saying you have to be a huge influence in every person's life. That will exhaust you and burn you out. But I mean, just the fact that you were able to offer a co-op, even if it's just for a limited amount of time or to a limited number of people, has an influence, a positive influence. So I was at a convention once when this kind lady came up to me, and it was a workshop for leaders, and it was a small group of us, probably 12 or something like that. It's a little too loud. We good? It's a little too loud. And at least it is to my ears, thank you. And so I was at this convention, and it was a workshop for homeschool leaders, and there were only about 12 of us in the room, which is nice, that's fine. But at the end of it, she said, you know what, Carol, I calculated you probably affected 3,000 people today. I'm like, well, how did I do that? And she said, well, this leader said she had a co-op with 50 families, and that co-op had a leader at 85 families, and that one had 15 families, and then she was an accountant at heart because she was doing the math, and she said, I figured about 2 or 3 children per family. You affected 3,000 people today. Like, wow, that's the impact you can have as a homeschool leader. And I'm not saying you have to invest tons of your time into every person, but just the fact that you're offering this has an effect on the next generation. So thank you very much for your efforts. You don't know how you're impacting people, but I know that you are. So thanks. Also, the advantages of co-ops is you're probably raising the academic standards of homeschooling. We've seen the good results that homeschoolers typically test very well. And some of that is because your homeschool co-ops are offering the classes that we find hard to do at home sometimes, right? The arts, which we know enhance academic performance. But also, I did not want to dissect the frogs on my kitchen table. I homeschooled for 14 years. My kids are now in college. And when it came time for that high school biology, I did not want frog guts on my table. My homeschool co-op had a woman who was a nurse, and she offered a biology dissection class. That was fabulous to me. So my kids got the lab aspect of biology. We did the bookwork at home. It was a wonderful use of a co-op. So you are raising the academic standards of homeschooling, which is great. Great for everybody, and great for preparing our kids for whatever they're going to go on to next. Recognize this picture? It's you, right? You feel like this sometimes, but you are doing a great thing encouraging homeschool parents, and particularly the homeschool moms, by forming and running co-ops. And I know that's sometimes the most exhausting aspect of your job, but it really is really beneficial. When I belonged to a co-op, we had, I don't know if you do this in your co-op, but we had this set up, so we met for 3 hours, but 2 of them, the mom had to volunteer, meaning she had 1 hour free. And we asked that she not leave the building, unless it was sort of really important to go to the Kroger, which was next door, but not leave the building, stay. And we set up a room with food and coffee and drinks and couches. And it was called Chew and Chat. So we chatted with each other and we chewed on food during our free time, and it was wonderful. And most of the time, women were just talking about parenting and life and homeschooling, and almost every week you'd see someone bring in some sample of curriculum for another mother. There was one mother who was struggling with reading, and she mentioned that in Chew and Chat, and the next week she got all kinds of different resources that she could try with her struggling student. So you're doing a tremendous thing. Matter of fact, sometimes you're doing it so well that the support groups find themselves hurting because the co-ops are fulfilling the need for support. It's just the way homeschool is morphing. So I want you to realize that's a huge benefit of belonging to a co-op as well as you guys leading one. You're also fighting homeschool critics. Don't you remember, if anybody homeschooled 14 years like I did, or a long time, don't you remember in the beginning, it was always, well, what about socialization? And we don't hear that as much anymore, which is good. We have kind of addressed the issue because I think, to be perfectly honest, it was a legitimate criticism of homeschooling, if you will. It was also a misunderstanding, but as homeschooling grew, there were more people that you could find in your local community to form a co-op or a support group with, or field trips, and you found that the kids were not unsocialized at all. By the time my kids graduated from high school, I mean, you know, they were running the wheels off the car, they were so socialized, right? So it's like, stop the socialization already, right? So, but you did, through co-ops, help address this, and you gave a lot of credibility to homeschooling, but you also silenced a lot of criticisms, which is great. And I want you to know that you did that, or the people who preceded you did that. Are there disadvantages to co-oping? Yeah, we'd be here all day, right? Yeah, of course there are. It's hard work. You have responsibility for so many things when you lead a co-op. Don't you like your picture here? Is that how you feel? You have responsibility for the safety of the children under your care, right? And sometimes that's a problem when homeschool co-ops get really big, right? The kids are running all over, and you have to have rules and policies just to keep them safe. You're dealing with money. It's a lot of what I help homeschool co-ops deal with, the money management. Homeschool co-ops are starting to bring in tens of thousands of dollars, and they need policies to manage that money well. And then they get worried about their legal status. Am I doing things right legally with the IRS, or you know, even with legal structures and things like that? And we've got Darren Jones from HSLDA. I referred someone who came to my booth, and they were asking questions about, we have this policy about whatever. Is that okay? And I said, you need to go talk to Darren. You have that responsibility to figure out some legal things. This had to do with protecting children from abuse. Those are important policies, and you're responsible for some of that stuff. Volunteers, you get to manage volunteers. For better or for worse. Some volunteers are absolutely lovely, and they give their heart and soul. They are just servants at heart, and other volunteers come very reluctantly, and some don't come at all, right? And you get to manage them, and they all have personalities, and most of them would love for you to take over their responsibilities of parenting and homeschooling. I'm going to tell you, you're not going to do that. Some volunteers, but you have to manage volunteers. And the larger your group gets, the more that takes. And hired workers. Do any of your groups hire and pay somebody to teach? We hired someone to clean up after us, because guess what volunteers were not doing? Cleaning properly. So we had to hire someone to clean the church after we left. So you have issues like that, and we can talk about what's involved there, hiring workers. But all these things are kind of your responsibility. And I'm not even talking about the academics or the classes you offer, right? This list probably could go on. I just wanted the ones off the top of my head. It's just a lot of work. Not saying it's impossible. It's very rewarding usually. Again, the pros are you're having that huge influence on the next generation. You're encouraging homeschool moms. You're doing a great thing. But it can result in fatigue and even burnout, which is a workshop I did yesterday about burnout. I've got some handouts back down at my booth left over from that burnout handout if you'd like those. Homeschool CPA downstairs.